Hello, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, is Bahrain's opposition fading? Anti-government activists hoped to gain new momentum last week with calls for nationwide protests on August the 14th. But did their plans flop? Filling in for Malika Bilal today is our very own Omar Badda. Omar, you are going to be looking out for our online community, what they have to tweet, what they have to say. I should actually also say hello Bahrain, because we have a big online community in Bahrain. What are they saying about this subject?
Yeah, we have a pretty significant feedback. In many people's opinion, Bahrain is sort of the forgotten, protest movement of the entire region. And they were huge early on, a couple of years ago. There was a renewed attempt at having these protests again just on August 14th, just now. And we asked the question of what did people think of the ImTomorrow movement and their attempt at putting together these protests on the 14th, which ended up being much smaller than earlier protests. If you take a look at my screen, Muhammad Murad here says it was a farce, an absolute total failure. Life was completely normal here in Bahrain. We went to the mall, to the cinema, and to the restaurant. So they're describing how ImTomorrow basically had no impact at all. But on the other hand, we have Amuri here who says it was a huge success as the entire regime was upside down trying to stop ImTomorrow. So they see the fact that the government employed so many resources to make sure this does not end up expanding as a sign that the opposition is still a force to be reckoned with. Of course, for those of you at home, we want to make sure that we hear from you and we want you to be part of this conversation. So tweet us your thoughts using the hashtag AJStream.
Also joining us in the studio, we have Mata. Mata is a former opposition MP with the Al Wafaq National Islamic Society. Mata, how many times have you been on the stream so far?
This is the third time.
Welcome back for the third time.
Thanks.
And one quick question. Do you Instagram? Do you take pictures?
In fact, I have it, but I didn't activate it yet.
All right. Can I encourage you to activate your account, because we have an Instagram account here at the stream, and we want everybody to be able to access it and take pictures as well. If you really like pictures and you really like photographs, you're going to love our Instagram account.
So you are encouraging me to activate it. I'm going to activate it by today.
Okay.
A snapshot from this.
Wow, that'd be a great one. Okay, that'd be the inaugural photograph. And if it's really good, like some of these ones, it could end up with the hashtag stream of the week, and it will be featured on our page. So it better be a good photograph, Mata. So here are some of the hashtags that we're also following in our community. Unrest in the Kingdom of Bahrain has been ongoing for more than 2.5 years as opposition demands for greater freedom continue to be met with a crackdown. Frustrated by the lack of progress, anti-government activists using the name of Tamarud, which means a rebellion, began calling for a new round of nationwide protests. They took to Facebook and Twitter and YouTube to promote their plans and mobilize Bahrainis. Their goal was to re-energize activists and give the opposition new momentum. They set August the 14th as their big protest date because it marks the 42nd anniversary of independence from Britain and 2.5 years since the start of the uprising. There were more than 60 local protests, that's according to opposition sources who considered the day a success. But critics argue that the protests flopped. Some even described them as inconsequential, as most streets were empty. They pointed to Tamarud's unpopularity and lack of organisation as reasons for the low turnout. So today, we want to find out 3 things. Who is Tamarud and why did they emerge? Is Bahrain's opposition a weakening? And what does the future look like for Bahrain? Yes, we're really, really ambitious, but we have the perfect lineup of guests for this level of ambition. In addition to Mata, we're joined by Salman Al-Jahama. He is a media attaché at the Information Affairs Authority for the Government of Bahrain. In our Google Plus Hangout are Ala Al-Shahabi. She's a founding member of Bahrain Watch, that's an independent advocacy organisation promoting accountable governments. Abdallah Al-Junaid is a political activist and founding member of the National Unity Gathering, that's a political party in Bahrain. And Ahmed Al-Haddad is a student and human rights activist. It's great to have all of you in the stream. I can't wait to hear from you in this conversation, but I'm going to start with Mata. We've had 2.5 years since the very first historical, huge protests in Bahrain. You were leading light, you were a very young, very well-known politician. What happened and what are you doing here?
Let me start first about what's happening there in Bahrain.
Sure.
In fact, the government, with all the threats that had been spread against the political activists and the human rights activists, they failed to stop people to insist about having the change. A lot of villages were sieged and they were not allowed to gather in huge and mass numbers, but and a lot of preemptive steps. We are talking about 600 houses were raided before the movement, and we are talking about a very wide arrest was going on. All these steps did not succeed to prevent people to gather in their villages, inside their villages, and to call for the change. And tomorrow will be another evidence about how Bahraini are insisting to see the change. Tomorrow there is a call for a very wide a protest in Bahrain, and you will see tens of thousands in the street, which reflect that the Bahraini are still having the energy and insisting to see the change.
That's interesting, because in 2.5 years I'm trying to assess what's happened, and you're basically being very honest and saying, well, not much, right?
It is too much. If you look at the situation in Bahrain, a small country, it is very easy for the regime to bring mercenaries and to control things by force. But 2 years and the people are still insisting to see the change.
All right.
A lot of observers, I met Western observers, they are asking me why the people are still insisting to see a change in Bahrain.
Right.
Why you don't lose a hope? The international community did not do a lot for Bahrain. The regional complication does not help you. Why you are still insisting? So for seeing people for 2 years protesting in huge numbers, this is an evidence that the Bahrainis are serious about seeing the change.
So since you've been gone, there's been a new movement that started up in Bahrain called ImTomorrow. Ala, will you tell us about this? How did it start? How did it get started?
Well, I think people were inspired following the June 30th rebellion movement in Egypt. Obviously, the context and the situation is a bit different in Bahrain. It's not the same groups or affiliations that have been calling for a rebellion in Bahrain. But the idea that people can renew and reinvigorate these revolutionary movements by calling on protests on a certain date definitely struck fear in the hearts of the regime. And immediately the counter-revolutionary response was a raft of repressive measures that were sanctioned through royal decree. Things like prosecuting the parents of juvenile protesters, fining people $1,000 or 6 years imprisonment for not carrying an ID card, a blanket ban on all protests in the capital, Manama, and legally revoking citizenship of anyone that's accused of terror-related crimes. So this raft of repressive sanctions really kind of reflected how paranoid and hysterical the regime's response was when a group of online activists called for protests on August the 14th.
So ImTomorrow was a social media generated movement. I just want to bring in Ahmed, who is actually in Holland. So you've been following this online. When you saw ImTomorrow for Bahrain, what was your first reaction?
I think my first reaction was my criticism to the 14th February coalition, because we're not having a solid organization with a well-known leader that's going out to public and speaking out for ImTomorrow exactly like it is. But I think that ImTomorrow was a success in inspiring the people, and it showed the media that there are people that are willing to go out and start sacrificing to get their rights. However, and also restricted the government in one corner. That's how we saw the security crackdown that Allah was talking about. But actually, the thing that it failed in is to get people down the street and to get local support that Matar is talking about, that tomorrow, Friday, they're going to go out and you're going to see the thousands of people. So I think the consensus from Tamarrud and the other local political parties and the local organizations that are seeking change should happen for Tamarrud, or another day in Tamarrud, or another name for another day to come, like the 14th Feb.
Hey Ahmed, we have a tweet here from online, somebody also named Ahmed, who says a policeman for each house in the villages is what I call Tamarrud success. And somebody else commenting on Sheikh says Tamarrud worked in Egypt due to extensive support from the military and the media, but in Bahrain the situation is reversed. So beyond just using the government crackdown as a measure for the fact that Tamarrud is a force, is there really any hope for anything more significant emerging from the protest movement, or is the situation in Bahrain just fundamentally stacked against you?
I think we're always turning into the bubble when you're speaking about Bahrain in the future, if this is going to change. I think one of the main elements that's missing in all of the political arena, not talking about human rights, I'm talking about this youth that are represented by youth like me. Those political activists that are youth, they're missing from the political arena. They're not taking any leadership role, and basically nobody's representing their political demand, not human rights demand. Therefore, we need this element to be engaged into the political arena in Bahrain in order to have some change, because we need to listen to them. If you're not listening to them, they're just gonna go out in the street and rebel against laws, and rebel maybe against, in the future, I don't know, their own organizations and parties.
Right, Salman, let me bring you into the conversation. You're hearing a lot of critique here from Bahrainis about the government that you are part of. When you heard about Tamarrud, what was the government's plan on how to deal with it?
I mean, the recommendations that came from the National Assembly that Dr. Ala Shahabi referred to was not about limiting people's freedom of expression. It was about trying to control the situation and trying to stabilize and secure people's safety. As you know, there's been a dramatic escalation in violence in the past recent months, which led to the death of policemen. Just 2 weeks ago, 2 Bahrainis were injured in a crossfire of petrol bombs, including a teenager. On Tamarrud Day, on August 14th, an Asian worker had his arm severely burned as he was trying to remove debris from the roadblocks. So my view on Tamarrud is that, yes, it was attempting to mimic what was happening in Egypt in terms of their methods and their outcomes, but clearly there was a very anticlimactic turnout. And it was nothing to do with the security measures. It was to do that there was not a clear, unified opposition front. The calls for Tamarrud were not representative, and it was a clear reflection on the streets that didn't amount to much.
Salman, beyond security measures, there's a report from Human Rights Watch that came out just this month indicating that the government is essentially cracking down on the right to free speech and the right to assemble. And we have a tweet here from Bahrain Unity that says the situation is becoming worse by the day. Muhammad Hassan and Nabil Rajab, of course, for those who don't know, Nabil Rajab is a very prominent human rights activist in Bahrain, both participated in the stream before, and they are both now in jail. So there's a security aspect, but how can you try to explain, what are these people missing? What is Human Rights Watch missing by saying that government actions go beyond security and are actually cracking down on freedoms and rights?
I think the term freedom of expression has been exploited and has been used as a shield behind every action. I mean, you can't have people coming out on the streets and essentially holding Bahrain's lives and livelihood at hostage in the name of freedom of expression. You were able to exercise this within the legal bounds. You were able to exercise this in one of the over 200 rallies that happened in the past year and a half. And if you're aware of Bahrain's size, that's about 2 to 3 rallies a week, which is quite a substantial amount. People criticize the government in parliament, they do it through the papers. So that platform is available. But what is not allowed is when you breach the legal code and you cause and endanger people's lives.
Let me just play 2 video clips. They're so very, very different, Ala. I know you're going to be able to watch these as well, and I want you to comment on what's going on here, because I'm really thinking about the opposition and how successful you are being right now. So this is a huge rally. This goes back to February the 23rd, 2011, so just 2.5 years ago. Look at the numbers of Bahrainis out here on the street. They are protesting. They want reforms from their government. So then we go back to last week, and to the rallies that were set up and inspired by Bahrain's ImTomorrow. And the difference is startling and shocking. The protesters can't get onto the main streets. There's barbed wire, there are police in the vicinity. You can imagine why there's some critics of opposition in Bahrain who are saying, well, you failed. How many people actually came out to support the cause? Do you feel that you've got challenges that are insurmountable right now?
I think that
Salman, I just want you to hold tight for a minute because we've got your point of view. I'm going to ask Allah because Allah was part of trying to get people to be out there and be involved in reinvigorating the reform and protesting for reforms in Bahrain. So Allah, go ahead.
That's a crime in itself. I definitely I attended both of those protests actually on February 23rd, 2011, and the film of the second video of the protest in the second video. Definitely different environments, definitely different security contexts, and definitely different political situation. In the second, as you saw, there are barbed wires. There was a face-off with the police, and there was an immediate tear gas attack in that particular protest. And so for me, it was amazing that anyone showed up at all. I mean, it was, if you were there, if you got into your car and you were driving to attend any one of those protests, you went there almost feeling that you'd be arrested instantly. So the idea that there's freedom of expression, there's freedom of speech. I mean, I'm sitting in Nabil Rajab's house and he's been in prison for a year now. Zainab Lakhwaj has been in prison for a very long period. And the day after, I mean, it's just simply not true what this government representative is saying about the National Assembly laws. The next day, following on from those, from that particular extraordinary session, Mohammed Sadef, a blogger, and Hussein Ahbel, who's a photojournalist, and two other people were immediately arrested and are facing serious charges to do with their online activism. So, I mean, the evidence is just, you can't carry on speaking in the same broken record about freedom of expression. In this government's eyes, there's sectarian discrimination and everyone is a potential terrorist. I mean, Nabil Rajab was a token example of a peaceful human rights revolutionary activist who embodied the very concepts of human rights in everything, in every act that he took part in calling for protests and being there peacefully. There isn't an armed struggle. It's very different from other contexts in other Arab countries.
All right.
It's as someone said earlier, it's a very small area. It's very contained. It's, you know, the clampdown is felt in every home. And you're being watched. Let's talk about for example, the infiltration of the secret police. I mean, to me, it feels like every third person is a secret mukhabarat person. So you're being watched very closely. You're being monitored, and you have also 2,000 people who have been arrested for their political activities.
All right, so I want to bring.
So I mean, there's just not the environment that's there that can allow you to have those numbers take part. It's just not physically possible.
Yep, so we have a sense of the environment. I want to bring Abdullah Junaid into the conversation. Abdullah, I have a tweet here on my screen from somebody named Batul who's comparing the protests today compared to the ones that happened a couple of years ago and saying essentially the reason why these didn't work because freedoms are tightly restricted now more than they were on February 14th, and the opposition is growing and more persistent on demands. Essentially that the opposition actually is not weakening but is in fact growing, and security measures are the reason why we're not seeing that growth more visible. What is your take on this?
Okay, Omar, I think the clearest statement was made on the 17th of August this month by Sheikh Ali Jud Habsi. And he said, in his own words, that ImTomorrow was a still war. You can go on YouTube, you can listen to what he said, and it is very clear. And with regard to the security measure taken by the state of Bahrain, I think in such tense situation, it would be more advisable to wave a thick stick than using it.
Interesting. So right now I'm hearing the challenges that the Bahraini opposition are actually having. Allah is describing the challenges, that it's very difficult to get people out on the street. But what I'm not hearing is, well, where do you go from here? If the movement to regenerate the opposition couldn't get out on the streets, Mata, what happens?
In fact, the activism and the civil resistance is not just about going to street. The people are they cannot imagine the future of Bahrain without a real political reform. And for me, I cannot see a big progress in Bahrain without a positive and constructive role by the international community. Suppose ImTomorrow movement, the numbers of people were thousands. And suppose all of us here in this discussion today agreed about things should go in the right direction and toward reform. Things will not change unless the international community, United States specifically, have a constructive role in this struggle. And that's why I'm here in DC.
But can you
encouraging
do you have a take on why that has not happened? Essentially, a lot of other protests in the region have gotten a lot of significant international attention. What is happening in Bahrain? Is it an opposition failure that the opposition is not getting international community support?
In fact, the major issue is about, for example, if we be specifically about U.S. government, it is about the Fifth Fleet. The U.S. government is having the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, and they have very strong tie with an authoritarian regime. They give this regime kind of legitimacy and kind of a credit when they call it a strategic ally and a major friend, old friend. This is how U.S. government is describing the authoritarian regime in Bahrain. Such kind of asset is used against the people. So if U.S. government will not play a constructive role in Bahrain, even if we find a very wide protest in Bahrain, I don't think it can move things forward. But at the same time, the participation of the people is important. Suppose we get an opportunity for change tomorrow while the people are in their houses. Why the regime will be forced to do change if the people are in their houses and they are not calling for the change?
See, Martin, I asked at the beginning of this program, because we're almost at the end of this main show, and I want to push ahead. What has happened in 2.5 years? And you said there's still hope. I want to put that same question to Salman from the Bahraini government. What has happened in 2.5 years? People obviously wanted change and reform. What have you done?
I mean, after the invitation of the Bahraini Commission of Inquiry back in November 2011, when Bahraini government invited an independent commission to come and openly scrutinize the government and point out every single mistake and every single grievance that occurred in 2011, I think that what is happening is that a list of reforms and reconciliatory initiatives that have actually been implemented in the past 2 years, I think are significant. But the fact that
Salman, can you name one of them? Because we're almost at the end of the program. The one that you're most proud of, the reform that you think that was impressive.
I think one of the biggest issues we had to address and prioritize was human rights concerns, and independent bodies have been established to address grievances that happened by security personnel against civilians, and they are being held accountable for their.
Can I jump in?
I understand that, and I know that was one thing you were going to say that was going to initiate an entire conversation when you talk about human rights abuses. And this is the perfect point to take that moment and that thought, guess I don't want you to forget it, into our post show at stream.aljazeera.com. And that's where we'll be heading, because this conversation is just beginning to get started and warming up. So what we'll be doing on Monday? Well, on the next show, it's just a headscarf, right? The hijab, but it's causing controversy in some parts of Europe. On Monday, we'll look at why some women who choose to wear it are coming under attack. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. We will see you online. Thanks so much for watching. Hello again, this is the Streams Online post show. I've just been talking to the guests saying, wow, that time went fast. That is why we have a post show. We are looking today at the state of the opposition in Bahrain. Our plan was really ambitious. We wanted to look at who is Tamarud and why did they emerge. Matamata, did we do that?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. One. And also we wanted to look at the opposition in Bahrain and is it weakening? We did that, right?
Yes, also.
Okay. Now, what does the future look like? We touched upon that, and we're going to go deeper into that. Let's get right back to the conversation. We ended with Salman, who was talking about the reforms that happened in the last 2.5 years. But I'm going to go back to Salman via a tweet from our online community. Omar.
Salman, we have somebody here online who disagrees with you. Batul says, sadly, the regime in Bahrain is the worst among all of the Arab Spring regimes. It has not made a single concession, and that basically is part of the problem. Can you talk a little bit in more specifics about what kind of reforms the government has made in the area of human rights?
All right, so there are many spheres that came about from the BIC recommendations, talking about judicial, policing, education, media, and other reconciliatory initiatives that have come about to actually ensure that extensive reforms are implemented to again allow people to trust the government once again and to bridge the divides that happened in 2011. And I started talking about the independent organizations that have been established to address accountability, to investigate mistreatments, the ones that occurred and the ones that continue to occur. We are serious about addressing those issues, and we are serious about training police officers to ensure that they are aware of human rights issues and to enforce the police code of conduct. This is something that is not going to happen overnight or in a few months. This is a serious attitudinal change and will take time.
All right, so Salman, I know that Allah is going to want to speak to you. So Allah, let me go back to you, and then you and Salman can have a conversation that I know you are keen to have. Allah.
I mean, I didn't understand a word of what Salman just said, so maybe we can take this conversation afterwards, because I think in reality, very, very serious ongoing human rights violations are taking place. I mean, it's just horrendous that a 16-year-old girl, Fatima al-Khawaja, was shot with a birdshot in her own home. I mean, this is something we've never seen. A young teenager girl is shot in her own home. Then the father is accused. Then charges are brought against her because the father wanted to raise the case. And then this also speaks into this issue of impunity. The Bahraini regime is probably being emboldened largely by international impunity. There is hardly a single criticism globally towards the Bahraini regime for any violations that the Bahraini government does. And the situation is we have overcrowded prisons. Both main prisons are being expanded at the moment. 40 prisoners were injured during a police attack on the prison itself, in which birdshot and stun grenades have been used. And so the reality on the ground here, I mean, we are post-Vicky. You can't even talk about Vicky reforms anymore. And those are a given anyway. Human rights are non-negotiable. So that's something we're not here. We're talking about political reform. We're talking about a prime minister that's still in power after 42 years. We're talking about an authoritarian king who still issues laws by royal decree. And we're still talking about the main structures of authoritarian rule are still in place. Nothing has changed over 2.5 years.
I mean, if you want to talk about
the monarchy is still in place, largely propped up by the GCC, different GCC states, supported and bankrolled by the Saudi government.
Okay, Allah, take a breath because I want Salman to be able to respond, and then Mata is also wanting to jump in too. So let me just get Salman to respond, and then Mata, then you can take us forward.
Firstly, about the culture of impunity that Dr. Ala Shahabi referred to. I'm sure you're aware that the UK and the US administration have been far from silent and have often voiced a criticism against the government as well as against opposition, but have they voiced those concerns constructively? So first of all, I reject the notion they have been silent. I wish they have. Secondly, about the people that she talks about, about the political reform that she refers to, that nothing happened. Just last year, there were historic constitutional amendments that were enforced in August 2012, which signified a huge shift of power from the appointed chamber to the elected chamber of parliament, which includes the elected chamber has the power to reject the entire government, which would force the prime minister to reappoint ministers. So those changes have been made, but I think what's happening, people like to have a very selective reading of the reforms.
Right, okay.
In fact, nobody agrees with what Salman is saying. If we go, for example, to Tom Malinowski, he is now nominated to be part of the State Department concentrating on human rights. His assessment that the BICI is a lost opportunity. The government did not utilize this opportunity to take Bahrain on the right track. This assessment is coming from everywhere, but the strategy of the government is just to try to avoid ignore all the advices and all the assessment about the failure, and they feel that they can go with it without admitting all these crimes. This policy will not work at all, and it is just an issue of time. And when we talk about the future, I don't know if this is the part that we are discussing now, the future of this movement. I think the future of this movement in Bahrain is very linked with the future of the region, of the Gulf. Until now, a lot of the activism and a lot of the supporter for the change, the pro-democracy movement, are scattered in the region.
Right.
The region is very divided with sectarian problems, which make in a lot of cases the pro-democracy movement is not that much unified. I can see a new generation who is going beyond these gaps between each sects, and this new generation, I think that they can do this change. They can grab and they can bridge the gap between all different supporter for the change.
Okay.
A lot of name in different countries. In Kuwait, for example, we have Shafiq al-Ghabra and Ghanim al-Najjar. In Bahrain, we have Nabil Rajab, who succeeded to have a wide popularity among different sects and different groups.
Speaking of the unity of the opposition in Bahrain, if that is even achievable, we have somebody here on Twitter saying Al-Wifaq represents the demands of the Bahraini citizens. Their leaders are our main representatives. We are all Wifaq. We have somebody else here saying Al-Wifaq is losing street support that made it recognizable as a political force to begin with. And then we have the following video comment that I would like you guys to take a listen to real quick from Noor. Take a listen.
Prior to August 14th, several key activists and bloggers were arrested and are still being held in custody in order to minimize participation and their influence on the events of that day. The government generalizes the multiple opposition groups we have, regardless of their ideologies, as if they're all a single group. So when one group plants car bombs, explosives, etc., the government immediately insists that all opposition groups were involved. No matter what your views are, if you don't support the government, you're put in that same generalized category.
Ahmed, I want to bring you into this conversation. On the opposition front, how can you keep the opposition from being defined by its worst elements, and what kind of organizational unity does there need to be for the opposition to be able to achieve the kind of success that we've seen in other countries in terms of progress?
I think one of the main problems that we're always discussing on the media is the human rights, and the political societies and the political other organization groups in Bahrain are only focusing on the human rights that are not negotiation. The main element that we always do not mention in our discussion is the political and civil rights that are supposed to be the main concern for each Bahraini and everyone that's discussing the political arena in Bahrain. And for that, just like the government representative was saying about political reforms, that the simplest thing in the Bahrainis' repression on political societies is the name itself. It's a political society, not a political party.
Right.
There is no law that regulates political parties in the country. And by that, you cannot establish a political party that can run the countries and the governmental affairs in the future. Simple as that. A youth like myself, students are not represented very well. They're 21 years old. That just that maximizes their age in getting engaged in the political arena. Different things that the government of Bahrain is not, and our opposition itself, they're not referring to when they talk. Internationally, they're speaking about the human rights, but our main concern is the political reform, the political rights and the civil rights. Despite the different views, despite the different demands, the main demand, I think, that is uniting everyone is the referendum. We can have a referendum on everyone, and by that is assured by the United Nations, by an international agency that monitors the group.
Ahmed, yeah. I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to ask you to finish your thoughts, because I'm going to move on to one more guest, and then we're going to close up this discussion for now. So just give us one more line, just to give us a sense of where you're coming from. You're obviously a human rights activist. What is the message that you want to leave our international community with about Bahrain and the opposition there?
I think that the international community should start monitoring the Bahraini situation from a political perspective, not a human rights perspective. And
please.
Okay, so let me just wrap up and end with Abdallah. Abdallah, yes, hello, go ahead. Yeah. I hope that's Abdallah, because that's exactly who I wanted to go to, Abdallah. The wise closing words from Abdallah.
Good, thank you very much. I think a few days ago, I exchanged some letters directly that went through the whole of Bahrain between myself and Al-Wafaq Secretary General, and we were discussing tomorrow. And in his reply directly to me on Twitter, and it was published on one of the Al-Wafaq Coalition electronic website, it says none of Al-Wafaq Coalition society or parties. I use the word parties because for English, audience. But I agree with Ahmed. It's not legalized or recognized to be so. But again, going back to Sheikh Ali Salman's letter, he says clearly that there is no call for Tomorrow or support to Tomorrow on that day. This is one.
Okay.
Issue two. If you go back, I need just one more minute.
I say, Abdallah, we're literally at the end of the program. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just collect your thoughts and give us a closing thought for our international audience, because we're literally out of time. But I do want to hear that closing thought.
Yeah. Okay. My closing thought. I would like very much for the current Al-Wafaq Coalition to come out and disclose the let's say closed session discussion that took place last month, evaluating where they are and the way out, and if they had, let's say, the responsibility to project themselves as leaders.
Okay.
I've heard more about sacks than Bahrain and Bahrainis.
Abdallah, thank you so much for being part of our conversation. Also, thank you very much to Mata, Salman Al-Jalahama, Ala Al-Shahibi, and of course, let me give him the full name, Abdallah Al-Junaid and Ahmed Al-Haddad. Thank you very much for allowing us to revisit Bahrain, the opposition, and what is happening there. Now, on Monday, a headscarf, the hijab, is causing controversy in some parts of Europe. On Monday, we'll look at why some women who choose to wear it are coming under attack. But if you're missing the stream, there's no need to. We're always online at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching.